Welcome, everyone. This is Caroline Valland. It looks like the attendees are starting to slow down. We've got about 250 people on right now. Thank you for your patience. We wanted to get as many people on before we got going. Scott, if you would like to toss the ball to me, I'll go ahead and get started with my presentation.
I got you, Carol.
All right, Josh, can everybody see okay?
Yep, I got your cover page.
I'll get going, guys. Thanks. Welcome. Good morning. We are so glad you were able to join us. I'm Caroline Valland. I'm the Executive Director of the Governor's Crime Commission, and welcome to our first ever virtual workshop. I apologize. I'm having problems, and my screen is not advancing.
Caroline, touch the mouse to the screen that you want to advance, and then yep.
I did that, and it's not working. There we go. We'll try to get going again. Apologies, everybody. All right, guys, so welcome to 2020. It's been quite a year so far, hasn't it? We've had some adventures. I know a lot of us have had to deal with some necessary change, including us at the Governor's Crime Commission. We are all still working remotely, as I'm sure several of you are. But that means virtual workshops. The downside to that is we don't get to see your shining faces. We don't get to put names to faces. We don't get to answer questions personally, so not ideal. But I guess the upside is you get to be at home in your comfy clothes. This last picture is me, by the way, before quarantine and after quarantine. We'll get rolling. Some of you may have noticed that when you logged on to the WebEx this morning, there was an agenda and a link for your RFAs and a link for the manual. But if you didn't, don't worry. Shortly on our webpage, we'll have all these materials posted. Currently on our webpage, you can see already the agenda for the workshop today. You can also see the 2021 workshop manual. I encourage everybody to take time to save this on their desktop, to save this on their desktop so that you can search it and look at it regularly. If you have questions about GCC and using our online enterprise management system, this is always a good first stop. Also, a special kudos to the grants management team at GCC who has worked so hard to get this slimmed down and a little bit easier to search. Also, shortly on our webpage and was in the materials that you saw when you logged on are the requests for applications. Those of you that were with us last year know that we published these in one big book. Since we're not meeting face-to-face, we're not putting them all in one place, but you'll be able to see each RFA for the funding source that you're looking for. So that is where you're going to go to look for the details of the kind of funding that you want to apply for. So that's the first start for you guys. And you'll hear a lot about these today, but this is going to be on our webpage if you're looking for materials. You'll also find a recording of this workshop. Now, it's going to take us a few days to get it up on the webpage, but that is the upside to doing these virtually. For the first time, we'll at least be able to have a recording. So if you know somebody who wasn't able to attend at all, or maybe somebody who had to miss it because of a conflict, they can go back at a later date and see it, which is the good thing. The downside, as I mentioned, is we can't see your shining faces. We also, it's much harder for us to do interaction and hear your questions. But if you see in the bottom right-hand corner, there is a chat panel. And it's important that you select everyone. This is actually a lesson learned from our workshop last time. Select everyone. It's down at the bottom of your list. That way, everybody can see the questions and everybody can see the answers. Last week, we had a couple of issues where people were asking the same questions over and over again. But if we can see everybody's questions, then take one shot at answering it. If you have more questions, we are going to try to have Q&A at the end of each session. If you put your question in the chat box and we haven't answered it, we are going to attempt to get to it. We are also going to be producing an FAQ after the workshop. So we'll take questions out of the chat and questions that we know have come up during the day, and we will put that FAQ on our webpage in the coming week. Finally, if you're like me, you think of your questions after, so please don't hesitate to reach out to your GCC planner or grant administrator. You'll get all their contact information today, but if you're new and you're working on a first-time application, you'll be working with the planning team. Breakout sessions. Shortly, if it hasn't happened already while I was talking, you will get an email with links to the breakout sessions. Those were also in that immediate login page when you signed in for this. You will have to leave this session. If we are running on schedule, we'll break about 11:45, and then we'll come back for the breakout sessions at noon. So you'll have to log out of this session and then log back into your individual breakout session. The good things about the breakout session is since they're smaller groups, you will be able to ask questions outside of chat. I hope that works well. But do be on the lookout for your email because that will have an attachment that you can select your correct breakout session. Also, during the course of this morning, Josh will be pasting links to the breakout session in the chat box, so you can copy and paste those. I'm going to quickly, for those that are new, give an overview of the Governor's Crime Commission. Diane Barber Whitaker is our Deputy Director. She also, by chance, is going to be your MC today. So once I'm done with my introduction, I'll be turning it over to Diane. Diane is in charge of the planning team. The planning team is the group of folks that work directly with our partners in the federal government. Just like you are applying to the Governor's Crime Commission for funding, we apply to the federal government to be able to sub-award it. And so the planning team deals with the federal government. They also work with the commissioners in helping set priorities, which we're going to be reviewing today, and helping commissioners and committee members score and review the grants. The planning team and staff at GCC does not choose grants, which ones are funded and not funded. That is done by the Governor's Crime Commissioners. The planning team is also, once you are selected to move forward, will work individually with applicants to help them make sure they have everything in order to open their grant awards. Jason Wimmer is the Director of Grants Management. The GM team is our largest team at GCC. We've focused the last year or so in really growing this team so we can lower everybody's caseload and provide better customer service. Once you have received your award from the planning team and we've signed it and gotten that award back, it'll go towards the grants management team, and they will open the grant and help you get going. The other business unit of the Governor's Crime Commission is the Compliance Division. Katrina Agostino is the Director of Federal Compliance. Katrina has the unique opportunity of dealing with our auditors on a regular basis. And those of you that have worked with us for a while know that we've had to go through several audits, which is always good and helps us improve our practices. But Katrina is the point person on that. She also works with the rest of our organization to ensure compliance. Tim Parker is the Director of the Criminal Justice Analysis Center. As applicants, you won't have a lot of interaction with the Analysis Center, but these are the folks that help us fulfill our mission in advising the Governor and the Secretary of the Department of Public Safety on criminal justice issues. The Analysis Center has published some research earlier this year on bond reform. They've also published part 1 of a 3-part series on traffic stops in North Carolina. They're going to be working in the next year to assemble a data portal that'll be publicly available that aggregates a lot of data regarding criminal justice from around the state, which we're very excited about. I want to also, and they are last, but they are certainly not least, there's the Planning, Grants Management, Compliance, and Analysis Center. they would all fall down if were it not for our admin team. They are the foundation of all of us. I want to give a special shout out to Nikki and Betty and Miss Pat and Natalia and Sarah and Jasia, everyone else in our admin team that helped us get here today and get going and keeps us on track. We really appreciate it. I do want to give you some general guidance, and then I'll turn it over to Diane. This is the grant award calendar for 2021. I will give it a very cursory overview because the planning team's going to dig into it a little bit more later on. But the dates you really want to focus on is November 1st to January 31st, which is our GEMS application period. That's what we're going to be talking a lot about today. The planning team is going to walk you through how to apply in GEMS, what the funding sources are, what the priorities are, and they're going to help you guide through that. After that, we do a preliminary review. There is scoring, the commission votes. All of that takes several months and is finalized in June. And then we spend July into September making sure each one of the applicants is federally compliant and we're ready to open the award. The goal is to open most of our projects on October 1st. We have to follow the federal fiscal year, which begins October 1st. The exception to this is juvenile justice, and this is based on some guidance we've gotten from OJJDP. Those awards are probably going to start following a calendar year and will open on January 1st. So yes, you are going to be applying November 1st through January 31st for awards that aren't going to open until next fall. Applying for federal dollars is unfortunately a long and cumbersome process. I do want to walk you through the guidance that you will hear often today, and I'm going to say it in every way I can possibly say it on this PowerPoint, and that is to apply early. We only have we have a 3-month period, but at the end of that 3-month period for applications, our team is inundated with questions. If you apply at the beginning, if you apply in November, it's going to be a lot easier for you to spend time on the phone with our planning team. They can answer your questions, they can help give you guidance, they can give you suggestions. The other reason you want to make sure to apply early this year is, please note, January 31st lands on a Sunday. So January 30th and January 31st, the planning team's not going to be in the office. I want to just make sure everybody is aware of that and make sure they're thinking ahead. Planning and applying for a federal grant award is not something you can do in a day or a half a day. If you've never done it before, you're going to have to do things that may take you multiple days, like just get your log-on credentials for our enterprise management system. That may take a day or two. So please, please plan ahead and know that if you're trying to call because you're having an issue on the 28th or 29th, you're going to have a hard time getting through the phones. The other thing I want to give you guidance on is apply smart. This was the Governor's Crime Commission in 2018, especially when it comes to VOCA dollars. We had an explosion of federal funding, and it was wonderful because we were able to fund lots of programs. However, in the last couple of years, we've really seen this funding decrease. VAWA and JJ, Burn JAG have all stayed pretty consistent, but our funding for VOCA, which is our largest funding source, has been cut in half. There were quite a few people that we weren't able to fund for fiscal year 2020 because of the decrease in funding. There is an effort at the federal level to try to grow this funding, but right now, we don't believe we're going to see any increase in funding for federal fiscal year 2021. So be smart, guys. If you are applying for continuation funding, don't put a 20 or 30% increase in your budget from last time. I can tell you that from our experience this year, the commissioners will ask you to stay the same. You'll get guidance on this today from the planning team, but be strategic, be smart. Don't put big ask on here because most likely the commissioners are going to either not fund you or they're going to tell you to go back and take another stab at it. I think that is all I have. And so I am going to happily and willingly stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn it over to your Master of Ceremonies for today, Diane Barber-Whitaker.
Good morning, everyone. Can you see my screen?
We can see you and hear you, Diane.
All right, thank you. Good morning. I'm Diane Barber Whitaker, and as Carolina said, I'm the Deputy Director for the Governor's Crime Commission. I also would like to welcome you to this morning's grant writing workshop for the Governor's Crime Commission. Before we get started, Caroline mentioned that we will go to the breakouts. The breakouts on the agenda are scheduled at a certain time, but in going through our practices, we've noticed that the final presentation for the gyms online is considerably shorter than we thought it would be. And so if we end up a little early in going to the breakouts and finishing with our morning part of the presentation, we will just take the 15-minute break and then come back. So we may actually be finished before the time that's listed on the agenda today. So I want to welcome you all again, and I will start this presentation by introducing you to the members of the GCC planning team and the administrative team. I oversee both the planning team and the administrative team. As you can see from this slide, we have 3 planning teams. That's criminal justice improvement, juvenile justice, and the crime victim services. I've listed in the box the grants that each of those teams manages, but more importantly, I want to focus on the members of the team right now. So Navin Puri is the lead for the criminal justice improvement team, and most of you who are applying for law enforcement grants will be applying through the Burn Jack program, and those grants are managed by Navin Puri and Keon Ash, and those are the members of our criminal justice improvement planning team. Next, we have our juvenile justice planning team. The lead planner for that position is actually vacant right now, and Tony Lockley is the JJ planner for that team. Those of you who are interested in providing services to youth in our communities, that would be the team that you would likely be involved with. Our largest grant funding source is our Crime Victim Services team. They handle our VOCA, Victim of Crime Act funds, as well as our Violence Against Women Act funds and our SAS funds, also from Violence Against Women Act. That team is led by Sandy Dixon. Managing the VAWA STOP and the SAS grants are Karen Lombrey. And then the other members of the CVS team manage the VOCA program because it's our largest funding source. We have several people dedicated just to managing that team and those fundings. That's Dawn Brown, Jim Lassiter, and Adonica McAllister. And then finally, supporting all of GCC, we have our administrative support teams. You will actually find that they may be the people that you're receiving emails from in support of getting your application together or getting your award together. That team is led by Nikki Livingston. And on that team, we have Natalia Beckers, Jasia Knowles, and Sarah Smith. At this time, we're going to start our presentation, and it's going to be on preparing to use GIMS to submit your GCC application. So it will go through all of the things that you need as you prepare, even before you get into the GIMS system. As Caroline was talking about, the various things you need from the federal government and from the state. And that part of the presentation is going to be led by Navin Puri, our CJI lead planner.
Go ahead, thanks. Good morning, everyone. This is Navin Puri, and I'll be starting our presentation, and it's fairly lengthy, so that's why we're splitting it up a little bit. A few things that you would need to know prior to even setting up to applying for your application. It's under our pre-award requirements. There are 3 basic keys of data that we're going to need to make sure you have current on your organizational side before you even begin. And that is your NCID credentials for the 3 or 4 persons that are going to be involved in this grant, your DUNS number for your organization, and your SAM registration needs to be current and updated. Keep in mind, everything is based on the subrecipient level. So when we're talking about DUNS numbers and SAM registration, we're talking about the subrecipient, which in most cases is either the city, the county, a nonprofit entity, or a state agency. It's not specific to a police office, a sheriff's office, and such. So keep that in mind. We're talking about the larger level, the subrecipient side, which is the larger organization that this grant is being applied under. So if you're a nonprofit, you also want to make sure you have your federal tax IDs information available because that will be needed as part of the application process. So basically, you're going to be either a unit of government or a nonprofit corporation. So the first piece of information you want to make sure you have are your NCID credentials. Keep in mind there's going to be at least 3 different roles on your grant application, and sometimes 4. You'll have a project director, a financial officer, an authorizing official, and sometimes an organizational administrator. Each individual must have an NCID credential that associates them with their organization. So if you have not got an NCID or are in need of one, the easiest way is basically to go to the NCID website, which is ncid.nc.gov, and start the process of applying for an NCID through that. When you get into the NCID website, you'll see the login, but again, if you don't have one, you'll need to register first. So look on the little right-hand corner or the bottom of that screen for the registration. If you have a current NCID and you have not touched it or used it in a long period of time, you may want to go back and basically refresh it or make it active again. What we ask folks to do that are in agencies that apply annually, keep the NCID that you started with if it's associated with your organization. It's better to renew it or make it active every year than to do a new one every year, because that's just going to cause all kinds of heartburn for you. So when you get into the NCID website, it'll give you some choices. Most folks are going to be affiliated with one of these choices. You're either going to be local government, you're going to be a business, which I guess would basically be like the nonprofit, or an individual. You just have to pick one of these to get started on your registration process for an NCID. Once you click the appropriate link, it'll ask you to set up your profile. You will fill out a series of questions, and there may be a couple of security questions involved in that also. And then it will basically help you get a user ID and a password. Keep in mind, this takes a little bit of time. This is not an overnight thing necessarily. It can take a week or 2 and sometimes longer, especially in this era of COVID when a lot of folks are doing things remotely. Things are a little bit slower. So if you don't have one and you're in this presentation today and you know you're going to be part of this application process, and you know the folks that are going to be part of it, I would suggest after this presentation you start working on getting your NCID credentials. Once you have your NCID credentials, then you're able to get into our GEM system. We have a link on our website. It's ncdps, .gov is the main website, /GCC gets us into the GCC portion of that. And you'll have a little link there to log into GEMS, and you would click on that. Now that you have your user ID and password is where you can now place that information into here to get into the GEMS portal. Once you get into the GEMS portal, you will be looking at a screen similar to this, which will give you a couple of choices. It'll say My Projects, and it'll say My Profile. You would start with My Profile because if you are new, you would still need to set up your profile in GEMS. You've already established one in the NCID system. Now you have to basically come back over here and establish some information on GEMS so that the system will recognize who you are and associate you with your organization. You click on the My Profile page. The first thing it's going to ask you is select your organization. If your organization is already in GEMS, and we have thousands of them in here, so hopefully yours is one of those, you will just basically find it on our giant drop-down list and click on it. If your organization is new to us, you will need to set up your organizational profile in here as well as your individual profile. So at that point, you would click the plus organizational button, the green button. It is at this point that you will set up all this information for your organization. So like I said, you will need to have all that information we talked about. You'll need your federal tax ID, you'll need your SAM registration information, you'll need your DUNS numbers, and you also need to have proof of the SAM that it's a current SAM registration. So you would basically complete this part and fill this out and submit it through, and then it would basically come to someone on our side to review and approve. So now you are able to have your individual IDs in the gyms, and now you have your organization in gyms. Now the next part is making sure you get the right folks into the right roles in gyms. And like we talked about, there's going to be 3 to 4 different roles that you will need to focus on for your application process. So at this point, you would click the Request Organizational Roles button on the left-hand tab. There are multiple roles, so let's review that briefly. You have an authorizing official, a financial officer, a project director, and an organizational administrator. We'll start backwards on this one just to kind of give you a layout. The organizational administrator is what we would refer to as a traffic cop in gyms. In other words, this person is responsible for keeping the organizational information updated on gyms. So that's the person that basically monitors when the SAM's going to expire and puts the new one in there, and makes sure that your DUNS numbers are always accurate and your IDs, your fiscal year is up to date and all those things. It can be someone on this list that we're going to talk about. So it doesn't have to be a 4th person necessarily. It can be one of these 3 roles, and then someone in one of those 3 roles can also assume the duties of the organizational administrator role. The project director is going to be your day-to-day operator. They're going to be the one we have the most contact with on this grant application. And once the grant is awarded, we will have the most contact with that person. They're the ones responsible for all the reporting. They're the ones that have to file and initiate the reimbursements that have to be submitted through GEMS. So they're going to be a very important person, so make sure whoever is in that role knows that they're going to be the ones that are going to be the day-to-day contact with our office and your organization. Your financial officer, it's fairly self-explanatory. It's your CFO. If you're a county, if you're a city, it's going to be whoever the financial director is for that city or county. If you're a nonprofit, it's going to normally be your board treasurer on your board. Your authorizing official is then going to be the person that signs off on behalf of that agency or the organization. Again, if you're a governmental agency, it's usually a city manager or county manager. If you're a state agency, of course, we have, our secretaries of departments and such. And if you're a nonprofit, it's going to be the board chair. So they have basically sign-in authority on behalf of the organization to do that. And so those are the basic roles that we would need you to make sure you have the right persons in the right roles. And also keep in mind that in a lot of cases, these roles do change. I know a lot of times nonprofits change annually. Obviously in government, people change all the time. So keep those roles updated as you go through the life of your grant, because eventually, if you have the wrong person in there and we're trying to contact that person, or you're trying to submit something through the circle and the loop of GEMS, it's just going to go into an empty shell and no one's ever going to see it. Okay. So this is the screen that I mentioned earlier on the left-hand tab about request organizational roles. So this is the screen where you would click on those, and it would ask you what role do you want, and then it will ask you a justification behind it. So again, if you're the authorizing official, you would say, I'm the board chair of this nonprofit, and I need to have the ability to be the authorizing official. The same would be true for the financial officer, the same would be true for project director. And also you can pick an organizational administrator on this list also, and that would be something you would need to think, who's the best person to serve in that role to keep everything updated on behalf of the agency. So like I said, if you're a new organization, you would submit your information in there, and then it would be sent to us and we would approve it. And that would also be the same if you're a new organizational administrator and you don't currently have one. That would also need to come via the system back to us so we can at least clear and approve that person. And like I said earlier, it's very important to update your project roles because, of course, people do change their roles from time to time, and that's important for the life of the grant. Again, your grant could potentially be a 1-year grant or a 2-year grant, depending on your funding sources and what the project needs are. So keep in mind during the entire life cycle to keep these roles updated so that our office would have the right information to have contact with you guys. And that's my part, but one more thing I want to present out that emphasizes what Caroline mentioned at the beginning. She talked to everyone about applying early, and I have been doing this more years than I care to count. And for those of you that know me know that when I stand up in front of you guys, on a stage, wherever we may be, I always say this, and I will say it again. If you're sitting in this presentation today, I hope on some level you have some idea of what it is you want to apply for. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, if we open this in November, ideally from where you sit, you'd probably want to have this thing submitted to us by Christmas. That gives you some breathing room. It gives us time to work with you guys on getting things corrected if we saw something wrong. So again, make Christmas your target goal to try to get your application submitted. And with that, I will be happy to turn it back over to Diane for the next part of our presentation.
Good morning again, it's Diane. Can you hear me? All right, so I'm going to talk about the grant application. Navin has actually talked about a little bit about this. Once you've started your organization and everyone has their roles and GIMs, you can actually now start adding the information for your project in GIMs. And so at this point, the project director or the person who's entering this project will click on the green button in GIMs for Plus Project. It's going to take you to a project setup screen, and it's going to ask you for the basic organizational kind of setup information for your project. That's going to be things like the project's name, what do you want to call it, a project summary, a start date, end date, which priority you're applying for, and you'll hear more about the priorities from other members of my team, who's going to be filling the different roles inside of that project, or the director, financial officer, and authorizing official. And so it should be noted, though, that in order for you to be able to click on one of those persons' names in order to set up your project, they have to already have their NCID, and they also have to already have that organizational role in GIMS, because otherwise they're not going to be one of the names that's going to populate the drop-down box. So if you wait until the last minute to set up your project and those other people haven't done their piece, then that's going to delay you from being able to do your piece. GCC has some project naming conventions, and that's how we like our projects to be named, so that they are consistent, and so it makes it easier for our staff. So for crime victim services and JJ projects, we'd like you to put the agency, then the county, or if it's statewide or multiple counties, priority, and the year. So I've given a couple examples. So if Caroline had an agency called Caroline's Counseling Services, they would be Caroline's Counseling. They're providing services in Wake County. They're applying for a GCC grant in what we call our underserved priority, and they're applying for year 2021. That's just an example. If you're applying for a criminal justice improvement project, they like for those to come in as the year, then the agency name, and the equipment. We give a large number of equipment grants, $24,500 or less, to law enforcement agencies across the state that they can apply for. So in that case, if we have the Franklin County Sheriff's Office and they're applying for tasers and holsters, then their grant would be entitled 2021 Franklin Sheriff's Office Tasers and Holsters. I want to next emphasize the project application date. And here I'm not talking about the application cycle, but the dates that your project start and end date should be. So for VOCA, VAWA, and CJI projects, the start date for all of these applications should be the same. It should be 10/1/2021. And the end date, if you have a 12-month project, it's going to actually be 9/30/2022. And if you have a 2-year project, it's going to be 9/30/2023. And JJ has all 2-year projects, but they have a different start date than our other grants. It's a little bit delayed because of some things we have to do with the federal government once we get the project. And so those start dates should all be 1/1/2022. And then they'll end 2 years from that, which is 12/31/2023. All right, so now let's talk about the sections of the application and kind of the information that you should put in each section. The first sections of the application you will see are the project summary, abstract, and narrative. And in these sections, this is where you're going to tell us about the problem that your project's going to address. Anytime you're asking us for funding for something, it should be in relation to a need or a problem that your community has, and that you're trying to develop a project to help the members of your community address that need, or to provide services to people in order to respond to that need. So Ideally, you will have some local information and statistics to support that request for funding. Even though you may have statewide and find like human trafficking is, a national problem and there's been a large increase in it, we need you to tell us why specifically you need a human trafficking project in Fayetteville, or what's changing and happening in your community and how this project is going to help that. On CVS projects, you'll also have goals and objectives. And each project should have one or two distinct goals. There's availability to put two, I believe. And then in each of those goals, you have one or two objectives. And how that's set up is each of the two objectives feed up to the goal. So for example, you have a goal, and this is your first goal for this particular example problem. And it says, we will provide counseling and mental health services to 150 victims of sexual assault, and you're going to do it through 9/30/2022. So under that goal, now you're going to tell me objectives of what kind of things you want to do in order to reach that goal. So objective 1 is that you're going to implement an agency-wide structured intake and discharge system, including the use of clinical assessment tools to ensure that you're actually assessing the victim needs and giving them their services. And that's going to take you till 12/31/2021. So you tell me you're going to start in October and you're going to set up this intake and discharge system during these first 3 months to make sure that you are assessing the victim's needs and are accurately able to identify what your people coming to you for services need. And then objective 2 is that you're going to provide services to those people. In this case, you do evidence-based counseling. So you're going to offer weekly, individual, and or group sessions to meet the needs that you identified in objective 1, using your discharge and intake tools. Each objective must have a statement of the objective and then how you will achieve that goal. And then it should also have a performance measure, how you will measure that you're achieving that, and some evaluation goals. What methods you're going to use to evaluate your progress into meeting both the objectives and the goals. Another really important part of the project application is it's a small part on the application, but it's something that you need to consider and that we consider as well, is your project sustainability. As Caroline has mentioned, our funding in VOCA, which is our largest funding source and the one that a lot of people are applying for, has really decreased. Our other ones are pretty much staying the same and have stayed the same for several years, so they haven't really increased significantly or decreased significantly, but we have more and more people applying for them. So as part of your application, you need to be thinking about project sustainability. What is your plan to, if you start these services in your community and you receive a grant this year, how are you going to help sustain that project in the event that you do not receive a grant for the next cycle? And how are you helping support your organization with fundraisers or other elements in order to help make the match or to provide services in your community? As federal funding tightens, all applicants will need to seriously consider their ability to continue to provide services in their community from other sources besides GCC. Your project application has several elements, and all of these elements should work together as like pieces of a puzzle or pieces of a picture to show how your project's going to be implemented. A really important piece of the application is the project budget. If you complete an application and you do not submit a project budget, your application will generally be eliminated in our first round of review because you are coming saying you want to provide these services and you want to do this, and this, but we have no idea, and you ask us for an amount of money, but then we have no idea what you're doing with that money in order to support that. So all project applications submitted to GCC require a budget. And you actually need to think about the budget and maybe actually prep it a little bit beforehand in Excel or in Word or even on paper before you get into GEMS and start trying to fill it out online, because there's two parts to that budget. There's a line item budget, and then there's a detailed budget narrative that you upload with the attachment. So when you're doing the application and you review through the RFA, you will see that there's the application that's in GEMS, but there's also a standard number of attachments that each of these funding sources request that then is used to support your application. Because the application, when it's printed, is maybe 4 or 5 pages with all the fields, but you're submitting all these attachments to go along with that. And one of those attachments will be your detailed budget narrative, and I'll tell you how that works with your line item budget that you put in GIM. So, in a budget application, and this is all federal costs, should be allocable, allowable, reasonable, and necessary. Allocable means that it generally means prorated. You are taking a cost that your agency has and you are allocating it to that project. So for instance, if you have a staff person and they're working half on this project and half for something else, they would be allocated 50% to the project and 50% to United Way or some other funding source. Anything you charge to the federal project has to be something that's being used for the federal project, and the percent of it that's being used for the federal project is what's allocated to the federal project, which is your project intent. It has to be allowable. Different funding streams will fund different things. For instance, VOCA will fund vehicles. It's a large funding stream, and vehicles are an allowable item. But vehicles are not an allowable item for criminal justice improvement grants. So you have to know or read through the documentation to make sure that what you want to do is actually allowable for that federal funding source. It has to be reasonable, and we're talking reasonable in price. It has to be reasonable in relation to your community for that service, for that salary, for the cost that you're saying, equipment costs. Your agency should have some procurement policies by which you bid out or compete or determine that something is reasonable in price, because you need to make sure as the grantee that what you're asking for is in line with the market value of what you're charging the federal government. And it has to be necessary. If it's not useful for the project, then it shouldn't be included. As I just talked about, costs should be prorated based on the percentage of time that that position or that equipment is used by the project. And so as an example, if 25% of the staff member's time is used in support of the project, then 25% of the cost of the salary and fringe benefits for that employee can be included in your grant application. So this is how the GIM budget actually looks when you kind of built out a budget. So it would look like this in GIM. So what you're going to enter is the quantity. So the first line here is one of the staff persons for this particular project. So you see the quantity, you see the unit cost, then GIM comes up with the total. It does the math for you. And then you see that out of this person's salary, they're going to provide part of it through other sources as cash match, so maybe through United Way or something, or some other fundraisers. And then the other part of their salary is going to be paid as federal share. This federal share line is how much you are asking the federal government to provide for this particular project. And so this is what this will total up to how much your grant award is worth. So you'll see that for these people, they've also put in fringe benefits, workers' comp, unemployment, and those things are generally listed in GIM. So once you put in the salary, these are drop-down elements in preparing the line item budget. All right, so once you've built your line item budget in GIM, then you go into Word or whatever program that you would like, and you create a document, a narrative for every line that was in that line item budget explaining what it is. Because GIM's only gave you a small amount of space for the naming of that line item. And then it gave you the dollar amount that you're requesting, but here is where you tell us what you're doing with it. So for instance, for a salary position for a bilingual advocate, here's an example. The salary for the person is $48,000 per year. They're full-time, and they're going to be 100% project funded. So in your narrative, you're writing all of that to kind of help support what you had just filled in the line item budget in GIM. And here you're telling me what that person is going to do for the project, how they're necessary for the project, and why that cost should be supported with this grant. So this person is going to provide advocacy and support, and it just goes forth and kind of tells like what this person will do for the project. And you'll do that for everything. You'll do it not just for the people lines, but also for the equipment lines, for the salary. You're going to give a brief explanation of why that's necessary for the project. When you're looking at personnel, but also looking at any line, a category inside the budget, it should be for those things that are necessary and for those individuals that are providing services to this project and being funded by this project. So when you're developing your project plan, before you actually go and start entering it in GEM, you're thinking about how you have these various staff people, what percent they're going to be working on this project, and then deciding who's going to feed into this grant application. So in this case, you see we have a couple of staff that are going to be 100% funded by the project, some staff that are partially funded by the project, and then we have some managerial and director level staff that are providing oversight that are also being partially funded by the project. But for instance, there are other staff in this department who are not being funded by this project at all, and so should not be included in the application. As you're going through a particular budget category, some of the definitions that you'll see in GEMS are provided here. So the quantity, for instance, for personnel, is generally the number of times that person is paid. If they're paid monthly, then that would be 12, or the number of hours that person works annually. If it's an annual hourly employee, you would have up to 2080 if they're 100% and working 40 hours a week. And then unit cost is the monthly salary or the hourly rate of pay for the position. And then GEMS comes up and does a totaling for you, where it's going to take the quantity times the unit cost and give you a total. Cash match is the amount of cash funding that your agency is providing towards that person's salary, but it's time they're still working on this project, but you're just providing it from another funding source. Because VOCA and VAWA often require match funding, where your agency has to put up so much of the money towards the cost of the project. So here's where you're filling that in. And match, I'll talk a little bit more about match. As far as there's cash match, which is the amount of cash funding your agency is providing from other sources, and then there's in-kind match, and that's donated work, for instance, volunteer hours that your agency is providing towards this project, or items that have been donated are being donated to your agency to support this project. And then your two types of match equal the full match that you're required to provide, and then the federal share is the amount you're actually asking for it to be awarded to you from federal funds. In the budget category of personnel, personnel will include the salaries, the wages, the fringe benefits, and other allowances that your agency provides to employees as part of their compensation project. All fringe benefits are allowable as long as they are reasonable or required by law, and for instance, unemployment insurance or something like that that's required by law, and they have to be paid to other non-grant funded positions. So if your agency does not provide health benefits, then you can't give the people on the grant health benefits. It has to be consistent with what your agency is providing for other sources and not just billed out to the federal government. Fringe benefits are included but are not limited to FICA, leave, health, dental, vision, retirement benefits, workers' comp, unemployment. All of that should be included in your cost for fringe benefits, and then whether you're asking for it from federal sources or you're paying it from other sources. Oh, and I did not say this, but of course the cost for the fringe benefit should be prorated based upon the cost, the percent of the person's salary that is charged to the grant, and that's based upon the percent of the person's time that's being used for the services for the grant. All right, so next we're going to talk about travel. Travel expenses are allowable costs for employees that are working directly on business for this project. For instance, if I'm traveling to families or I'm providing services at multiple locations, then that travel cost can be allowed for some of our funding sources. And once again, These are all dependent upon the funding source and what's allowable for that particular funding source, but they're generally allowable, and it must be in accordance with your agency's written travel reimbursement policy. So right now, I think the federal rate is 53.5%, 53.5 cents per mile. But if your agency's travel policy says 35 cents a mile, because that's what you pay everyone else, then that's what should be in your grant. We'll ask you for a copy of your travel policy as one of the attachments to confirm that what you're saying for the grant is in alignment with what you pay generally for everyone else. And if you don't have a travel policy in place, we'll use the rates from the state of North Carolina's travel policy. When you're in GEMS, it will ask you to show the travel calculation as the unit and then the cost per person. You can also request lodging, you can request per diem, you can request mileage, airfare, ground transportation, and baggage, and other allowable expenses, each on separate budget lines. So if you're sending someone off to a travel to go to a conference, then their lodging for the number of nights would be aligned, the per diem, how much it is for their food would be its own separate line, their airfare would be aligned, their taxi expenses would be aligned. If there's some baggage costs with that airfare, that would be aligned. So everything is on its own separate line in the budget for that conference. But if you're sending 3 people to the conference, then you would have 3 units because you would have like 3 travelers. And then GEMS will do the multiplication for you. And then mileage should be listed as the estimated number of miles that a traveler will travel annually. So for instance, if you have someone who has a job that requires them to go to 3 different schools per week, and those, they're doing that for 40 weeks a year, and it's 50 miles that they travel each week, then you would do the math and come up with the annual number of miles for that person for the year, and then whatever your annual rate of reimbursement per mile is, and put that into GEMS to come up with the total. And I've explained it pretty quickly, so here's an example showing you kind of what it looks like. So you see that there's 3 people going to this conference, and so for the 3 of them, they each have registration fees, and it's $500 to give a total cost. They each have airfare, and it's $620 estimated at $625 a person. Cost, lodging, per diem, baggage, going on and on. The number of units times the cost per person, and then it comes up with a total cost, so that the travel cost for this particular group of 3 people to go to this conference is totaling out at $61.05. All right, so the next budget category I'm going to talk about is equipment. Equipment, per the federal government for these grants, is defined as a durable item with a useful life of more than 1 year and costing more than $5,000 per unit. But if your agency has a policy where it says that equipment is anything that costs more than $2,000, then when you do your application, you would follow your agency's written procurement and purchasing policy for that particular line, and that would be equipment. Right? And so here's an example showing they bought some machines. The other budget category that's inside of GEMS is supplies. And supplies are just what you think they are: the pens, the papers, the Post-it notes, also the small electronics like printers and things that are lower in cost and that generally don't exceed your agency's procurement threshold, and those are all considered as supplies. Supplies are generally expendable items, things that'll be used up, cost less than $5,000, or in agreement with your agency's policy for other supply purchases. So maybe supplies in your agency is everything that costs more than $500. And then supplies are generally things we think that will be used up during the course of this project. So for instance, the paper is the paper that the GEMS budget asks for it by year. So for each year, you would have a supply line. So the paper cost for that particular year for this particular project. And then the paper cost for the next year for this particular project will be in the year 2 budget, if it's a 2-year project. And supply items should be listed by major type, listing the cost and how frequently you're going to purchase it. Here's an example showing a budget with supplies, and you can see it has things like the general office supplies you're thinking about that they're going to purchase quarterly. But then it also has some of the other items, for instance, laptops up here that are below this agency's supply threshold, and then also supplies that you're going to buy some stuff for victims throughout the year, and all of that's ending up in your supply budget. And then just like in the detailed budget narrative, you'll also do a supply narrative and you tell us what those supplies are. Conferences and meetings have their own special rules inside of DOJ, Department of Justice. And so as you're planning for a conference, you need to think about that ahead. And this is not for your staff to attend a conference, which would be under your travel, but in your conference planning is saying you want to be the host for a conference. And a conference isn't just your typical meeting or training meeting of your staff or your partner. It's like a conference. And conference costs must comply with certain limitations that are under 2 CFR 200 and under DOJ grants management financial guidelines. And inside of that, they have specific guidelines and thresholds for conferences. As I've said, it's not a routine operational meeting. And the other important thing about conferences is that conferences supported with GCC funding must receive prior approval in writing. And so you've gone through the planning, you had the conference in your application, it's in your budget, it's in your detailed budget narrative. That's not approval. We actually have a separate approval form for conferences inside of GCC that you'll go through with your grant administrator, and you'll have to provide to them additional details about that conference, and you're going to need to get that approved by them before your conference, well before your conference, so that you can have approval to pay for the items in your conference. So an approval in your project budget is not approval for that conference. You have to go through the conference approval process. As you're thinking about a conference, these are the thresholds that DOJ has in place for different items inside of a conference. For instance, if you're having a conference and you have audiovisual services, the max you can charge to DOJ for that is $20,000 total, no matter how many attendees you have, or $25 per day, or $20,000 per day. So you'll need to look inside the DOJ Grants Management Financial Guide, which can be found online under DOJ's website if you're planning to have a conference, and make sure that everything you're putting in your budget and thinking about that conference is alignment with what DOJ will allow. Oh, food and beverages are not an allowable expense for conferences through our federal funding. Contracts and consultants is another area that requires special approval through GCC. So contract approval also has to be approved by your grant administrator before you enter into the contract. Just because you had it in your budget and your budget's been approved, the project's been approved, that contract also has to be approved by your grants administrator, and there's a form for that as well. So what you're going to do at your time of application, you know you want to enter into a contract, but you're doing this application in January. This project isn't going to start until October. You are not going to want to maybe go into a contract with somebody or promise a contract with somebody if you don't even know you're going to be funded yet for sure, right? So what you will enter into your application is a proposed contract or a copy of the template. And that template is available on our website, or a copy of your proposed contract. Your organization has a contract form or contract way that you always do contracts. As long as that is compliant with 2 CFR 200 and it meets the standards that GCC requires, has to be in every contract, then you can use the one that your agency already used. For instance, universities and a lot of larger organizations have really standard defined contracts that they already use. As long as they're in compliance, then they can use that. If you don't have something like that, that's fine though, because we have a contract template that you can use. So you don't have to like make one up. You can go get this one and you can, say, the names might not even be realized yet. It's to be determined because you don't know who you're going to contract with yet. But at least you have it in there in support of what you're planning to do inside of the project. Because once you get the grant, you're going to need to get that contract approved first anyway. So you can use the template for your application. So these are things to think about when you're looking to use contractors or consultants. When you're going to have a contractor or consultant, you will end up having to have a signed contract agreement stating what work is to be done, the estimated time to be worked for this project, and the cost associated with that work for this project. I mean, we have to know what you're planning for that person to do and how much it's going to cost. When you're supporting so now you've gone into contract and you're trying to get reimbursed for it, the invoices for the contractor or consultant have to have the vendor name, the hours worked, the services performed, and what they did for that particular month. So when you're thinking about contractors and consultants, the rates for the reimbursement or for the charge for that individual who acts as a contractor or consultant is $81.25 per hour, not to exceed $6.50 a day. That's the federal tax. If for some reason the person you are trying to contract with or to hire as a consultant to provide services charges more than that, then not only do you have to do the contract approvals, but you'll have to get approvals for the excess rate because now they're over what the federal government typically allows in this role. And so you'll have to support that, and you'll need documentation to support why that person makes more or should be paid more than $81.25 per hour. And it's not just that, this is what they always charge. It has to be something to support what services they are providing in this grant that are worth more than $81.25 an hour.
Diane, this is Caroline. I just wanted to give you a hurry up on time. I think we're starting to go a little bit over.
All right, so contractors and consultants, thank you, Carolyn. Counselors, therapists, IT support, all of these are examples. Unallowable ones, your board members and employees or relatives of employees, that's often can be a conflict of interest as far as contracting, so generally not those. We've talked generally about some of the stuff around contracts. It has to be within the project period time. You need to submit a resume for all your contractors, and their rates should fall within the approved range. Last, we're going to talk really quickly about match. So match I've already talked about is the part of the project that's not being supported by federal funds. So this is the cost share. You may have heard it called before, where if the federal share is 25 to 80% of the project, then the match share may be that if it's a 75% federal share, then you need to come up with 25% match share, or if it's 80-20, then you need to provide 20% for match. Read your RFA because different funding sources have different match requirements. All right, so we're going to talk about some of the ones that we have here. VOCA generally requires a 20% match. VAWA generally requires a 25% match. Juvenile justice, 25%, and CJI doesn't require match. VAWA's 25%, though, is for governmental organizations. That would be the local and state government organizations. Nonprofits applying for VAWA or statewide coalitions, which are also nonprofits, have no match in VAWA. So the match services can be in-kind or cash match. I talked about that. The match can only go once towards a federal project, so you can't count the volunteers' hours towards both of your federal projects for that 1 hour that person worked. If you have more than one project, then that hour counts towards one of those projects, and you need another hour to count towards the other project. Evaluation of any items needs to be in accordance with cost principles, and that means that you're just really showing how it's reasonable and it's market value. The cash match can come from various sources, other government funds, private donations, your fundraisers. If you have questions about your cash match, is this cash match or not? Is this allowable as cash match or not? Then reach out to your planner or your grant administrator. In-kind match are donated items that are necessary for the project. So if someone donates your agency, I don't know, a really expensive piece of art, that's not really necessary to our project services, so it can't be used for your match. I've given some examples of some things that you might have donated. This PowerPoint will be available, or our planners and staff know this information and can support you in doing it. You must provide documentation to support the value of your match, and as part of that, volunteers have to do timesheets just like staff do for the time that they're donating to the project. So you'll need to have a timesheet for all of those volunteers to get that time counted as match for in-kind match. All right, and it's just saying it needs to be allowable. And here's something showing you how to calculate match, whether it's a 20-80% share. But the truth of it is, gyms will do this for you. As you're entering the lines in your line item budget, and you put them as federal share or match share, then in the end, gyms won't let your application go through if you don't have enough match. So you'll need to come up with some additional hours or some additional items that to help build your match for the requirement for that priority. As we talked about, nonprofits do not have a match requirement for VAWA. And for VOCA and JJ, agencies can request a match waiver. Now, when you're building your budget, you're going to need to include all those items that you would have as match in your budget, because even though you request a waiver, it's not approved yet. And so you have to show where if you get the grant, but you don't get the waiver, how you would meet your match. So you're going to build your budget with the match in it. And then if you think you would like a waiver, you're going to go through the waiver request process for VOCA and JJ, which includes at the time of application, you're going to submit a letter on your agency letterhead telling us what would be the hardship that your agency would have if it had to provide this match, and kind of what are the circumstances around why your agency needs this match. And those can be things like the area where you're providing services is really economically distressed, and so you really don't do that great with fundraisers, or it's a domestic violence shelter, and so not everyone can volunteer there because its location is secure, and so you may not be able to have a number of volunteers like other organizations, or it's really rural, and so people can't get there. So whatever your circumstances are, that's what you're going to tell us in the letter. And I put up here, COVID-19 is having an impact on people's ability to volunteer and fundraise. So maybe that's your reason. Your planners can help you, with this letter, but it will need to be submitted with your grant application as an attachment if you want a match waiver. Then we'll collect all the letters, we'll review the requests. Some of these requests are eligible to be reviewed by GCC staff. Once we review them, we'll let you know whether we've approved your waiver request or not. And then at that point, we'll work with you, and our IT staff will take the match out of your application. Now, what I want to emphasize is that getting a match doesn't mean that you get 20% more money. You still get the federal share that was in your application. You just no longer have to send in timesheets for volunteers for that match, or show proof where that person received extra money from United Way for that position. You still would receive, if it was a $100,000 grant and you built your application with $80,000 federal share and $20,000 match share, you're still only going to get $80,000. You're not going to increase that. All right, so for this particular, this year, our applicants in VOCA and received match waivers across the board for COVID. Remembering that this application, though, is for the applications that'll be starting 10/1/2021. So if you want a match waiver, you're going to need to request it, because hopefully we will be rolling out of COVID. I've already talked about this. Match funding is not required for nonprofits applying for VAWA because their match is already waived. Also, tribal organizations applying for VAWA, their match is already waived. We do not have the authority to issue VAWA match waivers to local government and state agencies applying for VAWA. Indirect costs is another important part of our application. If you have direct costs are generally those things directly attributable to the program, while indirect costs are generally the overhead type things that your organization funds across the board for everyone in general. For example, rent, utilities, office supplies, things you can't directly bill, those are your indirect costs. As we said, direct costs you can identify specifically with the project, whereas you can't for indirect, but they're costs that your agency has. Indirect costs can't be covered under a single project. Administrative costs applies for the agency as a whole. You can charge indirect costs to your project. We accept two types of indirect. If you have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate, you'll have a letter from an agency at the federal level that gave you an indirect cost rate. You need to upload that letter. And then in GEMS, you can actually write in your own percent that's on your letter for the cost, for the type of project that you're doing. So often universities have an on-campus rate and then they have an off-campus rate. Then you'd be using like your off-campus non-research rate, because this isn't a research project, and you fill that in GEMS, and then GEMS will then calculate your indirect for the line items based on that rate. If you don't have an indirect cost rate letter from a federal agency, you can still claim what we call the de minimis rate, which is you can claim 10%, and that's based on the modified direct total cost as your base. And the base for that, GEMS will ask you to select lines that need to be included in calculating your indirect. That would be all your direct salaries, wages, fringe benefits, supply, and travel lines would be included in calculating your indirect. And then it's going to be $25,000 of the first dollars of each subaward. And so if you have a contract or that is providing part of the services of the grant. So for instance, you have a contract that is providing legal services or mental health services to the victims as part of your grant, then only the first $25,000 of that counts, even if it was a $50,000 or $75,000 award, only the first 25 will count. But GEMS will, once you identify that line as that, then GEMS is going to help identify which part will be included. The de minimis rate can only be used by agencies that have never had a federally approved indirect cost rate. If your letter expired, then you can't claim de minimis. You have to just do direct costs. If you receive more than $35 million a year in federal funds from any source, so that's often some of our county governments, then you can't use de minimis. Your agency either has an indirect cost rate or you're just going to use direct costs. So GEMS gives you the option. This is showing how, an example showing how GEMS is using these direct cost line items and adding them in and then doing the math to come up with the total project cost for this project is going to be the direct cost plus the de minimis that they received on the appropriate line items. De minimis does not include equipment, and it doesn't include like some people who are outside of the grant in your staff. Once you're done with that, GEMS will come up with a budget summary, and it's going to ask you, you'll do a budget summary for year 1 and a budget summary for year 2. You can duplicate the lines, or you can change line items and not include them in the second year. For instance, if you're buying laptops in year 1, you don't necessarily need more laptops in year 2, so you can take that out, and then your federal share and your match share becomes your total budget. So this is an example showing you how the budget will look in GEMS once it's kind of built. We went through the different categories, and there's year 1, year 2, and then finally you see your total budget, the match funds, and then what your total federal request is. And that's how much your grant application would be. So in this case, the grant application is asking for $286,000 in federal share across the 2 years for this project. For the positions in your application, you need to have job descriptions. GEMS is going to ask you for all of this type of information. You'll complete that and complete what kind of professional licensure they have for positions that require that, for instance, lawyers or social workers. And then you'll also be talking about whether how much they're on the project, how much of their time is in the project, and the job duties, the job details of what that person is doing for the project. They may do some other stuff in other parts of their day, but we want to hear about what they're going to be doing for the project. Once you've done your application and submitted it, it gets reviewed by the commission, you get scored, yay, yay, you've been approved, you're approved for funding, you're moving forward. We enter into a phase called modification and conditions, where our staff will contact you and they will go through you like with your application about what elements and things you need to correct in order to make your grant compliant with federal guidelines. And so you will receive a checklist from them and have interactions with them on taking your application and bringing it into federal compliance, and any other forms or notifications or changes you need to make in your budget. Something isn't allowable, the commission approved you, but they approved you for less money than you asked. You'll do all of that through them through modifications and conditions. You'll receive an email. It'll tell you what needs to be corrected. It'll have a checklist. They'll review that checklist, review those items, and then contact you if you haven't corrected them. Please try to fix everything the first time. It makes it easier for our staff, and it actually keeps from delaying your award. Because then if they have to come back to you a second and a third time, and it gets past October, the other people will go ahead and start receiving their project awards. Once your application is in a good state and your project is ready, they'll change the status to pending award, and then that means that you're almost ready to be funded. All awards are pending based on the receipt of federal funding. If we don't get the money from the federal government, we can't give it to you for the project. So awards are not guaranteed. We are based upon getting our federal funding from DC. The final part of the process is the grant award process. Once that's done, you'll receive online a packet, and now we're actually moving to doing this electronically. Last year it was paper-based. Now we're going to send it to you via DocuSign. You'll receive 2 contractual documents, the grant award, which we used to call the gray sheet, and it was a gray piece of paper, which was your contract with GCC. It has to be signed. It's signed by Caroline, and it needs to be signed by, these documents need to be signed by people in those roles inside your organization. The project director, authorizing official, financial officer have documents that they need to sign as part of this grant award process. So you'll sign the grant award and the special conditions using DocuSign. In that DocuSign, there'll also be a packet of attachments. Those attachments are Adobe Acrobat documents. You'll need to print those out, sign them, scan them back in, and upload them to your project. You'll also need to send an email to your planner letting them know that you've done this, just in case we missed it in your DocuSign. Your award cannot be opened until we have those signed DocuSign documents and those attachments, signed, scanned, returned to GCC. As part of your grant award, make sure you review it carefully, make sure all the names are correct. That's why we talk about the names in the roles, because they print up on those electronic documents. And so if we have the wrong names, when your contract comes to you with the wrong names, then it has to be returned and reissued. After your documentation is returned, it will be reviewed by our administrative team for completeness. It'll be sent upstairs to our grants management team to open up your project, and congratulations, you can get busy working on providing services through this project. Any questions? I'm probably over time, so any questions that you have can also be submitted in chat. If we don't have the time to answer them now, we will write all those questions into the FAQ and answer them and post that on our website. Thank you. So I am going to stop sharing. I think I have, and I'm going to turn it over to Karen Longbreed, who will do one of the first of our another presentation.
Hi, everybody. I'm here to talk to you about the GCC calendar and the review process for the 2021 application cycle. I may take this a little quickly because Diane did cover some of this, but again, feel free to ask questions in the chat if folks are answering them right now. If there's probably not going to be time at the end because we are a little bit behind. So ask your questions in the chat, and also you'll see we have, and we're going to post that we ask questions document. So Caroline had gone over this, the grant award calendar in terms of the processes of how they're outlined. So for November to January, remember the applications are opened in GEM. So those become available as of November 1st. Staff are available to answer any questions that you might have. And reminder, we can't say this enough, the deadline is 11:59 on Sunday. So you need to make sure that you get those in, I would say like Navin said, by Christmas, but definitely before Sunday. Make sure you determine your authorizing official, financial officer, and project director for the agency and the project. You also want to set up your NCIDs for each person. I know we all keep saying it, but it's very important. We have many people who come to us at the very end and have issues with getting their applications in because those NCIDs are not completed. You're in front of your computer now. Get your NCIDs set up right now if you think you're going to be applying. Review required attachments for signatures and requirements. A lot of folks gave us feedback last year that they were not aware of certain attachments that were going to require signatures, and they had issues being able to get their authorizing official or somebody to get it back to them in time. So look at those ahead of time so you understand what attachments will require signatures. As folks talked about, register for your SAM and DUB. The preliminary review is a really important time for when folks submit the application. That's when the GCC staff goes through and makes sure that, one, you meet eligibility, the criteria for applying. That you follow the instructions in the application. And when I mean follow instructions, it means uploading the correct documents, name and numbering the documents as requested, completing the entire application. You'll be surprised how many people do not follow the instructions. We're also going to do a high-level assessment of allowable activities and costs. So I'm a VAWA planner. If somebody were to apply for construction, they want to put another level onto their shelter. That is not allowed. That's not an allowable cost. So I would know right away that had to be taken out as construction is not allowed. And we go back to folks and say, listen, if you want to adjust your project or if this is your whole project, maybe you shouldn't have it move forward. We want to make sure that you're submitted under the correct priority, as well as, like we talked about, the attachments and the fact that the project period aligns with the funding source. VOCA has a 2-year funding period up to a 2-year funding period, while VAWA only has 1. We want to make sure that, again, follow the instructions in the RFAs, read them, and make sure that you are following. Okay, so when the committee reviews and scores, the applications that pass the preliminary review phase are sent to the committees for review and scoring. And like I said, I want to make sure that people really do understand that when we do that preliminary review, we had applications that did not move forward to the committee review because they did not follow the instructions. They did not complete budgets and GEMS. They uploaded less than half of the required attachments for each project. So if you're doing this at the last minute and you're thinking like, oh, GCC will just come back to me, that's not the case. We have very limited funding, and we really have to it's a competitive process, and we really have to focus on people making sure that they follow those instructions and submit what we ask for it when we ask for it. So when we talk about passing the preliminary review, those that are sent to the committee for review and scoring. Now, the committee members do a high-level review of the project, concept, and the budget. Who will benefit, how many will benefit, the cost of administering the grant, geographical representation of the grant, and past performance of the applicant with grants and publicly funded projects. So you want to make sure that, especially if you've been funded through GCC, that your reports are in a timely manner, and that you are complying with all of the requirements that we've set forth on previous. We shoot to have at least 3 reviewers per application, and then what we do is each reviewer will provide the application with an independent score between 0 and 100. Then what we do is we average the scores of the reviewers to determine the final project score. After the project receives its score, they are put in rank order by each priority that it falls in. So in May, the committee is going to vote. So what we do is we take the information that comes from the rank order, and then we have those in order. And then what we do is we assess the geographical and victim-specific reach of the priorities throughout the state. The committee is then going to discuss the scored projects and make recommendations for projects or priority-specific adjustments. For those that have received funding in the past, that's when we've come back to you, well, after the commission votes on it. But some things might be where they applied for, $300,000. The priority doesn't have that much funding. We're going to need them to reduce their ask down to $150,000. So we have gone back. So those are types of recommendations that the committee might come up with. And what they will do is they will vote on the priorities with any recommendations that they have, so that they can bring that forward to the full commission. In June, that is when the commission votes and the applicants are notified. So what the commission will do is they're going to review the priority and the recommendations provided by each committee. They're going to determine if any additional project or priority-specific adjustments are required. Then what they're going to do is they're going to vote on priorities with the recommendations that they agree on. And then from there, we then notify the applicants of the outcomes of the review process. And folks will either receive a declination letter, an acceptance letter, or an acceptance with modifications letter. And that acceptance with modifications might be that we need you to adjust the scope of the project or reduce your budget or something along those lines. July to September, that's when we've talked about modifications and conditions. That's when us as planners, we go through with a fine-tooth comb and we really assess the applications for compliance with federal and state guidelines. And so what will happen then is that we will then send modification and condition letters to applicants to communicate the required adjustments for the application. You might have us say, and we also need to make sure that the application reads well. Remember, we get audits, and Caroline talked about, we have a whole compliance department now. We get audited by the state and federal government. So we have to make sure that if they come in and request to read applications that come in, applications that were funded, that they read it in a fundable manner. Some of the things that we've asked, people to do is to make sure that, you applied for a computer that was under $5,000, and you've applied in the equipment line, move that over. Or it might be in terms of some of the supporting documentation is not there, or needs to be tweaked. So that's when we come back to you and ask, or making adjustments to budgets and such. So that's what we'll come back and ask you about. So then what you do is we put the ball in your court, we give you 30 days, we ask you to make those required adjustments, and then you resubmit your application through GEM. Then as the planners, we go through again, looking at what we asked you to do, making sure that it was done. If we have to go back and forth, we will, but hopefully after the first round, applications are ready to be funded. Then the completion of all the modifications, Diane talked about the award packets containing binding award documents, federal and state special conditions, and additional documentation requirements are sent to the applicants. Like she also mentioned that those are going to be sent via DocuSign for the projects that are going to be opening up this year on 10/1, and we're going to continue with DocuSign moving forward. So we're going to need to make sure that the award document that's signed by Caroline is going to be signed by your authorizing official and project director. So you want to make sure that those folks are up to date in CRM, because then you're going to have to, in GEMS, that's on your side. And so that we don't have to do a back and forth and adjust the document. And then those award packets need to be sent back to us within 30 days. And then what happens is once you send the award packets, you're going to have the information through DocuSign, and then there are going to be some documents that you download and you upload to your project. We're going to be checking those by GCC staff. We'll check those. And once we have reviewed those and they're approved to move forward, that's when we transition you. So now you're going to stop working with the planners and you're going to start working with your assigned grant administrator. The grant administrator will work with the project director to open the project. The grant administrator is going to have to provide approval for required contracts and travel-related project spending prior to expenditure of funds. And also something to note is project funds cannot be expended prior to the start date for your period of performance, which is October. I know I say any questions, but for the spirit of moving on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be passing out, and to keep our time, I'm going to pass this over to Tony. And Tony's going to talk to you about tips for submitting a strong application. And I'm going to stop sharing. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, Tony.
Tony, we can hear you, but we don't see your content.
Okay.
Got content.
Thank you, Karen. Okay. Good morning, Tony Lockley. I'm the Juvenile Justice Planner for the Governor's Crime Commission, and I'll be sharing tips for a strong application. First and foremost, read the directions. Read the request for application thoroughly. Respond precisely to each question, criteria, or form. If a form is not applicable to your agency, provide a brief statement stating why it does not apply. Use the RFA as a guide. If your agency is applying for the first time, you may have questions about the online GEMS application process, required documentation, or need clarification on something you read in the RFA. Feel free to email or call GCC staff if you have questions. Create your plan. Develop a specific and actionable plan for what you want your project to do and why. Review the guidelines. How will your plan achieve positive results, goals, expected outcomes? Write out your plan. Who is your target audience? Does your project or program align with the funding priorities? Will it achieve positive results? Again, review the RFA. Problem, need statement. Identify the specific problem that your project intends to address. In other words, establish the context of the problem. Specify why this problem is an issue to the geographical area. Provide logical solutions to the problem. Focus on the needs of the people in the community. Establish the value of your project. If the problem affects a particular group of people, describe that group. How will it make a positive impact? And when you're inputting this information, be sure to put your best foot forward in a paragraph for each section, and I'll elaborate on that later. Because for each section in the online application, it only allows for a certain amount of characters. And as the funding decreases, the competitiveness of the process increases. So when you're inputting information, those individuals who are scoring and reviewing will only see the inputted information. Language. Using strong and effective language is resourceful in terms of understanding the application and project proposal. Be clear, stay concise, and focused. Briefly describe the project's purpose, identify the target population, and discuss program components which address the identified problem. Provide relevant details whenever possible. Do not use acronyms. Again, those viewing and scoring the applications may not understand the particular jargon that's used inside your particular area. Our committees are made up of a diverse group of people, and some may not be familiar with the jargon or have the background associated with it, and that might negatively impact your score. Impact on the population. Identify your target population. Is there any additional relevant information to include that describes your target population, such as race, income levels, education levels? Provide detailed information on how your project will make an effect on the target population. Provide clear statistics to support the problem. And establish the value of your project. Use local or regional statistics to support your needs. The closer you can, bring it to home. And how does it resonate with the community? Include data. Use data to define the problem that your project will address and the targeted population that it will serve. Data in the form of numbers, percentages, and ratios can give strength to your problem, your need statement. Use well-documented data, public databases, studies, and/or surveys. Again, it's best if your data is close to home. For instance, if you have a continued project, share data from your previous project to show growth. Collaboration.
or prospective partnerships. Partnerships are meaningful and create a collective impact. Highlight how you engage your partners in the project. Describe how your partners will contribute to the overall goal of the project. Identify the support you will need and request the MOU letter. Plan to request your letter support early in the application phase. You have to have an updated MOU letter in place from the organization you're collaborating with. We did have an instance where one time there was an agency that was applying for funding, and they mentioned an organization that they were collaborating with, but during the review phase, the organization in question had no knowledge that they were going to be collaborating with this agency, and in turn, it negatively impacted the score that the applying agency received. Sustainability. Establish how you plan to sustain the project over time. Explain your plan to continue or strengthen your fund diversification and or plan to raise more funds. Demonstrate that you have a good combination of funding sources. Again, the competitiveness of the process increases as the funding decreases, and there's no guarantee that your agency will receive funds. So you have to think in terms of, if your agency didn't receive further funding, would your agency have available funding sources outside of the federal funds? Deadline. Check the deadline. Make sure all required forms and necessary attachments are included. Make sure your organization's SAM registration is up to date weeks before the deadline. If your SAM registration is out of date when you attempt to submit, your application will not be accepted by the GEM system. Don't wait until the last minute to submit your application. Anything could happen. An issue with your NCID, your laptop crashes, or the attachments load too slowly. And also, just a reminder that the deadline is January 31st, 2021, and that's a Sunday. So the last day GCC staff would be available for assistance would be January 29th, which is Friday. And here is the GCC application character limits for each section of the GCC online application. You have your abstract, your narrative, timeline of activities, partnerships and collaboration, personnel and contractual, and your travel budget, and the character limits associated with each. And be sure to check your data entry, punctuation, and space count against the character limit. A suggestion would be when you're inputting your information, type it out in Word and use word count to make sure that you are within the character limits, so when you enter the information, it will fit within the text field. GCC application components, you see project abstract, the problem, and project narrative. Timeline of activities, partners and collaboration. And an example of your budget summary. This project in particular only has personal supplies, so their budget summary is relatively small. Any questions? And I will now turn it over to
Jim and Nathan.
Jim and Nathan.
Yes, I'll turn it over to Jim. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jim Laster, one of the planners at the Governor's Crime Commission on the Crime Victim Services team. Now, after we have talked about all of the stuff for a strong application, all of the components that you need, Navin and I are going to actually walk through a real grant in GEMS. Actually, I shouldn't say a real grant, but creating a grant in GEMS. We are looking at a dummy grant here. So some of the fields that you will see that we've just put stuff in. Some basic things about this. When you start with logging into GEMS, again, make sure that it is important you have your NCIDs up to date. You have your SAM registration up to date, that everybody is involved, knows that this is coming. I will strongly recommend that you take the request for applications. That is your friend. I want you to get out a highlighter, pen or pencil, stack of Post-it notes. I want you to read that over and over again, highlight areas, put a Post-it note on it, underline, write stuff in the margins so that you are prepared for this. I strongly recommend that you begin your grant by writing up the different sections in Word, then using Word's character count so that you can make sure that you fall within the mandates and you don't exceed and your information is cut off. Be as concise as possible, again, because a lot of these fields only have a 2,000 character limit, and punctuation, spaces take up part of that character count. So build your budget in Excel so that you in turn know exactly what you're looking at. So some standard things about GEMS. Anytime you are adding something, be it starting a new project, you will see a green button with a plus and the name of the area. So if I wanted to start a new grant, I would hit the plus project. My previous grants will be listed for me, so I can always come back and go through there and edit that project until I submit it. On every single screen, there is a red asterisk at the end of a field name. Those are mandatory. You must have something in there. If you do not complete that field, at the very top of the grant in Project Overview, you will get a red error message that tells you that your grant cannot proceed without that information. There is always a blue Save button on the screen. So as you work your way from screen to screen to screen, please, before you leave that screen, press the Save button. I would hate for you to get all the way through your grant, realize that you haven't been saving, and then you've got to go back and start all over again. So your menu button or your menu items are down the left-hand side of the grant. So you are going to work your way down the screen from each of these different menu items. So if we start, notice project name has a red asterisk. You are going to follow the naming convention as we talked about earlier with the year at the beginning, the funding year, put in there all of the aspects that we've asked you for. If it's a crime victim services grant, you would put your agency, the area served, brief title, and the last thing is the year. If it is a criminal justice improvement, you're going to put the year first, then your information and your territory in there. Project summary. This is a 300-character brief synopsis of what your project is going to be about. What is the problem and how we're addressing it. The start dates. Pay particular attention in the request for applications, whether it is a 1 or 2 year grant, put the appropriate dates in there. When you pick your committee, there is a drop down to the right. So if you click on the drop-down arrow, it will give you your committee. Once you choose your committee or area, then the next thing it will give you are the priorities available for you to choose. Make sure that you pick the radio button beside that priority so that you in turn can, again, follow the priorities as they are listed in the request for application. You have drop-down arrows beside your project director, your finance officer, your authorizing official. You will choose the correct one there. Again, that Save button is critical. So you will save it, and then we're going to start working down the left-hand menus. So after we leave this project set up, next is our implementing agency. We have a drop-down menu there so that you can choose the appropriate agency. If your agency is not on the list and you need to set it up, as typical with all of GEMS, there is a green plus to add, and the title is changed to implementing agency. Complete all of that information. If you have chosen your agency from the drop-down menu, it will automatically populate all of this information. Critical save. From your implementing agency, we're going to general information. On the general information, I recommend before you even start this, find your congressional districts, your North Carolina General Assembly districts, both the House and the Senate. You may choose the counties, and this can be several counties. Please, if you are doing a statewide grant or an area, pay particular attention to your counties, because you will see some agencies in here or departments, statewide departments. So be careful not to choose all of those, but only to choose the appropriate counties based on the area you are serving. You will need to know the population of that area. The principal place of performance is the city where your agency is located or corporate headquarters in the state of North Carolina. If you're in a municipality, not a problem. The zip code is going to want zip +4 of your principal place of performance. All right, now the abstract and narrative. Tony just talked about this. Your abstract, again, $1,500 limit. What is 1,500 character limit? What is the problem? How are you going to address it? What is critical with this problem in serving your community? Please, I tell everybody year after year, make it juicy, give us statistics, give us data, talk about the problem, how it affects your area. Then bring it home. Why is it important to the citizens of Ashe County that we get this grant? The same is true as you talk about your personnel contractual positions. Give us a narrative, 2,000 characters limit. Give us a narrative of who is going to be working on this, why are they vital to this project, what are the job duties, and the performance measures that they are going to be providing. Travel budget, we talked about that earlier. Talk about why it's important for travel to conferences or general travel in the area to serve victims or to provide services. Supplies, pay attention to your acquisition threshold. Again, this morning we talked about $5,000 being the federal limit. What is your agency's limit? Anything below the limit is listed as a supply. Anything above the limit is listed as equipment. You will also need to give us an attachment with a listing. If you have general supplies in there, general program supplies, general office supplies, you will need to give us a detailed attachment to this grant, itemizing all of those items. If you don't supply it and it's not on the list, it does not get reimbursed. So make sure that you're very detailed and thorough, as well as you have justified the need for these items. Very critical thing here is identify the partners that you'll be working with and describe your collaborations. You should be also uploading memorandum of understanding for each of these, but talk about your partners, what they bring to the table, what you bring to the table, and very critical, how you are going to play nicely in the sandbox together and provide these services. On your VOCA grants, it is critical that you discuss how you are going to assist victims of federal crime. So you will need to send a letter and upload a copy of that letter to your local U.S. attorney. Again, $2,000 character limit. Your project narrative. We just talked about making it juicy, bringing it home. This is a summary of what you plan to accomplish in here, how vital this grant is and what it is going to do and benefit the area that you serve. For VOCA grants, you must use volunteers. This is mandated. So I need you to describe how you use volunteers. Are they for administrative functions? Do they assist victims? Do they serve on various multidisciplinary teams? Again, for VOCA, who will be assisting victims with victims' compensation applications? Then, your project timeline of activities. Spell out briefly, 1,500 characters, the guideline. For the first 3 months, we will be accomplishing this. For the next 3 months, we will be accomplishing this goal. So be as consistent as you can and as detailed as you can. Again, 1,500 limit. All right. Then sustainability plan. Tony just talked about this. How will you be able to continue this grant and this project if funding ceases or funding is cut? What outside sources beyond the Governor's Crime Commission can you utilize to continue this project after the end date should you get this project funded again or not funded? What is going to happen? As well as in this, a strategic plan that describes, you've already told me who's going to be doing what, but suppose somebody gets hit by the proverbial bus or we get hit with COVID-19. What happens? Who's going to take over? How are we going to manage to continue providing services or using this equipment that we've just purchased? Save it. Now let's work down to qualifying information based on your priority. Based on the committee and the priority you have selected, GEMS will automatically know what questions to ask you and what certifications you need to give us. So please come through each of these areas. As you answer a question, depending on your answer, yes, no, or not applicable, GEMS will prompt you for verbiage if it is needed. So if another box opens up for you to type in something, be very careful. Make sure you answer each of those questions and supply any verbiage that is asked for. We talked about goals. You should have 2 goals, 2 objectives per goal. So how are we going to accomplish the purposes of this project? And your goals, how are you, with the goals, the objectives, how are you going to meet those goals? Again, the objectives support the goals. Indirect costs. In here, the first time you set up a grant, it is going to ask you about your indirects. Are you going to do direct cost only? Are you going to utilize the 10% de minimis indirect cost rate? Or do you have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate? If you choose option 2 or 3, GEMS is now going to prompt you to upload a certification of those rates. Your financial officer must sign off on it, and you are now locked in to abide by those indirect cost rate agreements. GEMS will also know if you have chosen the de minimis or federally negotiated rate. GEMS will automatically know that and now give you a chance when you start building your budget. You will see little check boxes here. So the check boxes, you can actually say, check this, yes, apply the indirect cost rate to it. If you leave it unchecked, that means that it is not applicable to charge indirects. If you check the box, GEMS will automatically calculate the indirects based on that particular rate as well as the money. So like if I was doing the de minimis, it would take 10% of this mental health therapist salary of $21,622. So it's going to charge 10% and automatically calculate my indirects. All of these others, supplies, fringe benefits, we have said those are not applicable to have indirects charged to it. So, all right, save your rate. Again, it is going, as you do this, it will send this to your financial officer to certify. Now, after you've done your indirects, you actually start building your budget. So when you add a line item, if you go down to the bottom of the screen, you will have a green plus button, in the upper right-hand corner, to add a budget line to it. When you add a budget line, notice all of the red asterisks of what is mandatory. So I can choose from the drop-down menu the particular item, say travel. Then I've got another option in the next box for drop-down, whether it's in-state, out-of-state, transportation, subsistence, per diem, lodging, baggage fees, taxi. Choose any of those. Yeah. Description, it could be just airport parking. Quantity, this might be 3 travelers for 1 conference. So I've got 3, and I know that they are probably going to have $10 a day. So I have got 3 days, 3 travelers, $10 a day. That would actually work out to be $30 a day. Now, GEMS automatically knows, based on your priority, based on your committee that you've chosen, whether you have match to meet or not. It is going to try to help you with that match and say, I've got a 20% match on this budget, therefore I'm going to calculate 20% of the total line item there. You don't have to do this. You might want to put all of your match on one line item, or you might want to spread it out. You certainly can. It is going to try to help you. You can either take advantage of it here, or you can say, no, I'm going to put it all on one line item, maybe use my volunteers. So if you do not save this but cancel it, it disappears. Blue, save. Okay? So each of these is in here. Now, as you go through the first time, after I finish my first year's budget, and I click on second year budget, the first time through, GEMS is going to, the very first line, give you an opportunity to copy your first year's budget into your second year to make it easier. If you choose to do that, it will auto-populate, but you need to go line by line through here. So, for example, third line down, I have a desk and chair. Well, in my second year, I've already bought that in the first year. I don't need another one, so I would click delete, and I would get rid of that line item. I don't need it in year 2. I've already purchased it. Now, all of the other stuff is appropriate, so I can leave it in there. It also gives you a match planning screen so that you can see, have I met my match? It will tell you on the far right-hand side if you are undermatched, I'm short. It will also tell you if I'm overmatched, but it tells you your total match allocation and will prompt you. Now, we're right on the money, so we're good to go here, but if I was off, it would say match short by, and in red, tell me $300. As I continue on down the screen, I actually have the option to edit line items and change the match if I need to increase or decrease the match. In the right-hand column, it tells you of this $4,000 computer, I have allocated $800 in match. Notice you have a cash match column as well. So if you've got donation of time, be it through volunteers or individual items, let's say this desk and chair were donated by a local furniture store. I could put that as an in-kind match. Anything that you're going to use for match must be added in the budget, all of the line items in there, and then you can go back and change the match on each screen. Your budget summary. On that, the first thing it asks you is, how will you be providing match? Give me a brief summary, 500 characters, of how you're going to meet your match if necessary. If you're going to request a match waiver, you need to clearly state that, and you must upload a match waiver request on agency letterhead, upload that to the attachment session. Make sure you save those. Now, you get a budget summary. This is going to show you just the different categories, how much we have allocated in contractual, personnel, supplies. For year one, for year two, the total, and then it's going to tell me again the total of my match and what my federal request is. So match funds plus federal request equals total budget. When we get into job information, as you build your budget, each position, GEMS will automatically prompt you for information about this individual. Please give me the employee name. Are they working full-time or part-time based in that is in your drop-down arrows. Give me the alphabet soup behind their name. Are they a licensed clinical social worker? Are they an attorney? Are they a professional counselor? So give me all of that. Give me the percentage of time they spend on the project. If they're working part-time, is 20% of their effort on that project. Give me detailed information about their job duties. Then in the fringe benefits section, give me the fringe benefits that you're going to charge to this grant so that I can see how you have calculated those benefits. Very critical with all of this detailed information that you save this. Now, the certifications that you have in here, like all of the project overview questions earlier, GEMS will know what certifications are required by your funding source. These certifications will change based on juvenile justice, criminal justice improvement, crime victim services. Make sure that you go down through here and check everything that is absolutely applicable to your grant. If you skip something, GEMS is going to come back to you and give you a red error message when it comes time to submit. So, attachment section. On your attachments, it is absolutely vital that you have read the request for applications, read that RFA. It is very detailed in all of the attachments that you must upload. This is where you do it. You would go in here where it says choose file, click in that field, locate your file, upload it, and then give me a description. Please name that file according to the naming convention in the RFA. So if it wants you to name it attachment 23, name it attachment 23. So that way everything is standardized and we can find your attachments and we will check off and make sure that you've got them all. And go back at the very end to the project overview. Notice that you have a green bar over there. If you had a red bar, it is going to tell you everything that is wrong. You will not see, if you have a red bar, you will not see the blue submit to financial officer to write out this grant. Until you satisfy everything that is red, and get a green bar, you will not be able to proceed. We talked earlier about doing your grant, apply early, apply early, apply early. Do not wait till Friday, July the 29th, and you've got 5 things listed in this red bar, and you've got to get them all taken care of, and your NCID has expired. So please, please start early. Now, once you click the blue Submit button to Financial Officer, this will automatically be routed to your financial officer. Once your financial officer approves it, it will go to your authorizing official. It is critical that all of these people sign off on this grant prior to 11/59, January the 31st. All right? We strongly encourage you to have this done by Christmas. Make sure that you've got it done. That way, if something comes up, somebody gets hit by the proverbial bus, NCIDs are not working for your people because they haven't renewed them. Make sure that all of this done. If you have this done by Christmas, then you are smooth sailing. Now, anywhere along the way, I can, as I've saved, I can actually get out of this project. I can wait a day or two, gather information or data. I can come back. Once I log into GEMS, I go right back to my projects, find my grant in my list of available projects, and I work my way down the left-hand menu and complete the items that I need. Every time you get into the grant at the beginning, you will start right here at this project overview screen. Anything missing is going to be in red, a red error message. So it will tell you what's missing. You go right down the left-hand menu to that section, fill it out, save it. You can get out of GEMS again, go get the next piece of data, come back in, add that data, save it. So, again, I'm strongly encouraging you, read that RFA, Post-it notes all over it, notes in the margins, underlined, highlighted. You have written your grant, all of the different sections or paragraphs in Word, taking advantage of the character count tool in Word. You have built your budget in Excel so that when it comes time, all you've got to do is cut and paste these paragraphs in, maybe cut and paste the line item description in the budget out of Excel. You already know what the math is. Then you can finish this. The stress of it will be taken off of you. If you have questions, if you have problems, if you run into a roadblock, that's what the planners are here for. We will be glad to help you and assist you in any area that you have concerns. All right, any questions?
Jim, were you going to throw us to the 15-minute break?
They don't hear you. I don't think they hear you. I don't think they hear you. Because I don't hear the feedback. I'll say it. Okay, this is Diane. I'm sorry, Jim was speaking. I don't think anyone heard him. We are actually ahead of the schedule, as I previously said we might be. So at this time, I have 11:12, so we'll just call it 11:15, and we'll take a break now until 11:30. Josh has sent everyone the link for the breakout sessions. The breakout sessions are set up based upon which committee you're going to for funding. So use those links to log back into a breakout session, and we will start those breakout sessions promptly at 11:30. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.